on whether those things have been effective. So, please, Mary. Actually, I'll just sit here.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay. Good morning. So Tom didn't quite tell the truth. He said that I'm the one who did the Learning Communities project. So that's really not true. And I want to start by just acknowledging that although I'm making the presentation, behind me are literally dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of people that I would love to thank by name. But if I did that, I would run out of the 13 minutes that I've been allocated for this presentation really fast. I just want to name some organizations. I mean, clearly Tom Brock's organization, Tom Bailey's, these Tom B's, even Tony Bright. It's CCRC, the University of Virginia, Harvard, the Washington Center for Teaching and Learning. There's so many organizations that stand behind me today, and without them, we would never have been here and ready to present findings from this 6-year-long study. But most of all, I want to actually thank the colleges that participated in the Learning Communities research that I'm about to talk about. Some of them are here today, represented, and I'm thrilled to see that. The staff, the administrators, the teachers, the students, without their involvement in this research, again, we would have nothing to say today about learning communities. So today I'm going to be talking about 2 evaluations of learning communities. The first is the Learning Communities Demonstration, which was a 6-site study that was started in 2006 as part of the NCPR. I'm going to be talking with respect to that demonstration about the short-term effects of learning communities. That is, what effects do learning communities have in the first 3 semesters of a student's tenure at community colleges. And we'll be using data that are pooled across 5 of those 6 learning community college demonstration sites. Those that targeted students in developmental education. They created learning communities for students in developmental education. But I'll be adding to that data that from a 6th site, the Kingsborough Community College, using data on developmental students from the Learning Communities program at Kingsborough. So basically I'll be talking about research on 6 community colleges running learning communities. Kingsborough was part of an earlier demonstration, the Opening Doors demonstration, which was launched almost 10 years ago in several community colleges across the country to test strategies to help students succeed. So this is the second of the 2 independent studies, but highly related studies I'll be talking about today, is a long-term follow-up of students from the Kingsborough Community College Learning Community Program. So it's a little bit complicated. You'll get it by the end of this. So the reports for both of these studies are coming out later this summer. They're not quite out. I think they've been sent to the printer, but we haven't gotten the copies back. However, we do have a 2-page, 1-page, 3-page, can't remember, it started off as a 1-page concept and it got bigger, handout that is available downstairs on the table with all the other materials that I encourage you to pick up, because this is a synthesis of our key findings from across these 2 reports. And then when the reports are out, they'll be available on our website, the NCPR website, MDRC website. Okay. Okay, I think everybody in this room knows what a learning community is, but just so we're all on the same page, I'll just go quickly through this. The basic approach of learning communities is to enroll small groups of about 25 students or so into 2 or more classes together. The courses are thematically linked, often scheduled back to back. Instructors in learning communities are expected to coordinate together, collaborate, actually talk to each other several times during the semester to integrate the curricula across the courses, to come up with joint assignments and sometimes joint assessments, and also to co-manage the progress of their students and intervene together with struggling students. And students are typically given extra support in the form of academic counseling or tutoring. So the underlying theory of learning communities is that through the strengthened relationships that students can form with each other when they're cohorted like this, and with their instructors, and through engagement with a curriculum that emphasizes the connections between courses and subject areas, and with extra academic support, they will feel a stronger sense of belonging and feel more engaged, do better in their coursework, be more likely to pass their courses, get through the developmental sequence, and even graduate at a higher rate. That's kind of the underlying theory of change of learning communities. So as this map shows, there were 6 colleges that participated in this research I'm talking about today. The learning community programs they ran represent programs as typically offered in community colleges across the country to students in developmental education. That is, they ranged from relatively basic learning communities to more advanced learning communities. For example, the Hillsborough program in Florida was on the more basic end of that continuum in that it linked 2 courses, a student success course and a developmental English course. And they added extra support through that student success course, but there was relatively little integration between the 2 courses. Merced and Kingsborough, on the other hand, represent the more advanced versions of learning communities that we've seen out there, in that they stress tight integration between the courses in the learning communities from the get-go, and then provided instructor support to help them make that happen. Okay. I'm still on the last slide. I'm going to go back to this. Okay. So 5 of the 6 programs we studied served only developmental education students, but one, the Kingsborough program under the Opening Doors demonstration, enrolled both students in need of developmental education and students who passed that placement test and were deemed college ready from the start. And this is important to keep in mind as I get to the findings. The colleges focused their programs around either English or math. 4 of the 6 targeted English in their learning communities. That would be Hillsborough, Merced, Community College of Baltimore County, and Kingsborough. And 2 of the 6 programs targeted developmental math, Houston and Queensborough. But they varied in the courses that they chose to link. Although all linked with a developmental education course, some linked with a student success course, others linked with college-level courses like biology or sociology, and a few linked with another developmental education course. So the links varied in that sense. Okay. We did a random assignment study to determine the effects of learning communities on selected student outcomes. So of those developmental education students at these 6 colleges who agreed to participate in the study, over about 1,000 or more were randomly assigned to either a program group, a group that was invited to enroll in learning communities, or a control group who could enroll in any other courses in the college as long as it wasn't linked in a learning community. So random assignment ensures that students in both the program and the control groups are similar in terms of observable characteristics like gender or age, but they're also similar in terms of harder to observe characteristics like motivation or engagement that could affect the outcomes. This is considered to be the gold standard of evaluation methodology, so we were able to do this in these sites. So by following both groups, the program group and the control group, and by comparing their outcomes, the evaluation provides strong evidence of the value added of learning communities on top of traditional services to developmental education students. Okay. We collected transcript data on all of the students in the study. There were 7,000 or more students who enrolled in the study across the 6 colleges. We collected transcript data for 3 semesters after they enrolled in the study. And then we also collected a variety of data to assess how the programs were implemented in each of the colleges. And I'll touch on the highlights from the implementation study. Here, of the 4 components of learning communities and the learning community model, the one component that was not reasonably well implemented or implemented with some consistency was the integration piece. So in some learning communities, instructors worked very closely together. In other learning communities, not so much. Interestingly, we found more variation within colleges in terms of that curricular integration piece than we did across colleges. So in some colleges, it was really difficult to find learning communities where instructors worked very closly together. And just that's one of our key implementation findings. It does have implications for our results. Okay. We also did a cost study looking at detailed cost data in 3 of the 6 sites and found that, don't have time to go into that right now, you'll have to read the reports, but on average across those 3 colleges for which we did have detailed cost data, it looks like learning communities cost about $500 more per student than compared to serving traditional developmental education students in the traditional way. Okay. Okay, so the outcomes that we looked at here in this study were basically the total number of credits earned, whether students re-enrolled in subsequent semesters, sometimes known as persistence or retention, and also completion. And basically, and I'll show some bar charts in a minute, but the big picture view is this, that we found a small but positive impact of about half a credit on credits earned in what we call the targeted subject area, which is either English for those learning communities that were organized around developmental English, or math for those learning communities that were organized around developmental math. So about a half a credit, 0.5 of a credit after 3 semesters of follow-up. We also found a small but positive impact of about half a credit on total credits earned. So if you added up the credits students earned in the targeted subject area with credits they earned from courses outside of that targeted subject, we are also looking at an impact of about half a credit. We found no impact of learning communities in the first 3 semesters on persistence. So now let's take a look at some bar charts that tell that same story, but graphically, a little more graphically. So you see 3 sets of bars, each set pertaining to the average number of credits in the targeted subject area earned by students in the program group, and that's the dark blue bar, and the credits earned by the control group, which is represented by the light blue bar. And this is shown for each of 3 semesters. The stars refer to statistical significance, and the more confident we are, the more stars, the more confident we are that these differences are not due to chance alone. This is the same story, but instead of targeted subject credits, we're now talking about total credits earned, and we're seeing that although there was a small impact in the first and second semester, that impact, as designated by the lack of a star, is no longer significant by the 3rd semester. Okay. We found no effect on persistence, as I said. The percentage of students who were still there 3 semesters later was a little over 50% for both the program group and the control group. Okay, so fortunately, we were able to obtain funding to follow the students at the Kingsborough site a little longer, 6 years rather than 3 semesters. And the news is somewhat is encouraging and somewhat surprising, given the modest average impacts I just talked about. Compared to the students in the control group, students in learning communities at Kingsborough earned on average 4 more credits and were about 4.6 percentage points more likely to graduate than students in the control group. Sorry? Good question. I don't have a bar graph on that. Could somebody, Mike, you remember? Thank you, Tom Brock. He has that number in his head. I'm really impressed. Okay. Okay. 31% was the base, and 36% roughly was the graduation rate of the program group. Okay. All right. So what was different about, what could be different about the Kingsborough program that could help explain these interesting times up? I'm getting that message. Okay, 1 more minute. And we have a few theories, none of which are tested rigorously. But the first idea is that students in the learning communities at Kingsborough got more traction early on in their career at the college. They had more opportunity to earn more credits. The second possibility is that, and this is not just a possibility, we know that that impact on graduation rates was driven more by the students who were college ready than the students who were in the developmental education from the get-go. So this has implications for the question of whether or not learning communities might work better for students who are a little bit further along on that continuum than students who start in developmental education. Thirdly, at Kingsborough, students were offered far more support than they were at the other 5 colleges in the form of academic support, counseling support, and so on. And finally, and this is important, the leadership at Kingsborough was really behind learning communities. And I think that faculty at Kingsborough got the message that this matters, and this may in itself had an effect on the quality of the learning communities offered. They also received a great deal of professional development and other forms of support to make sure that, that the model was being used to its full potential. So here's just summing up the basic findings from the study. And I think that the basic finding is that learning communities, as typically offered in community colleges, should not be expected to produce large or sustained impacts. However, some learning communities can do it. In the case of Kingsborough, we are seeing some significant impacts, and particularly the surprising finding that 6 years after that single semester intervention, students were graduating at a somewhat higher rate. Thank you.
I'm not sure how to get my presentation up there. They're working on it? Okay. There we go. Okay. So I'm Shanna Jaggars. I'm from the Community College Research Center. I'm going to talk today about 4 studies that we're about to release over the next couple of months having to do with acceleration of developmental research. And here's a list of the 4. There's the Community College of Baltimore County's Accelerated Learning Program, which takes students who place into upper-level developmental English and mainstreams them into college-level English with a companion support course that's taught by the same instructor, which is designed to help them succeed in that college-level course. And then second, we have Chabot. It's an English 102 course. This is a developmental course. It's open to any student who places into developmental English, no matter what their score is, even if they scored low. It's a single 4-unit course, and so it's an alternative to a 2-semester sequence that would typically be 8 units. Then we have the Community College of Denver's Fast Start program. This program includes both math and English acceleration, but here we're only looking at math. Denver has a 3-course math sequence, and Fast Start combines 2 of those courses together. So you could either take the lower and the middle sort of together as a compressed course, or the middle and the upper together as a compressed course. They've also combined the highest level of developmental with Gatekeeper Math. We're not looking at that in this study just due to sample size issues. So students in Fast Start also have a case manager, and they typically take a companion student success course. The 4th study is a little bit different. Here we're not looking at an acceleration program per se. We're just looking at some naturally existing differences in programming between different colleges. Those who designed longer sequences versus those who designed shorter developmental sequences. So I'm going to start by talking about the results for the Accelerated Learning Program, and I'm going to go through the others after that. So we did an initial study of ALP a couple of years ago. This is an update with more cohorts and more follow-up data. So in this study, we compare between students who took ALP with those who took the traditional alternative of upper-level developmental English. And the results I'm going to show you match these 2 groups, the ALP versus the upper-level developmental English groups, using propensity score matching. So the 2 samples are very similar in terms of demographics, their placement test scores, and their prior course taking. So Baltimore County has a 2-course college English sequence. First you take College English 101, then you take College English 102. So every ALP student enrolls in 101 during their ALP semester. So if you follow the 2 groups for another year after that, it would not be surprising that most ALP students who are here represented with the black bar, that most of them did enroll in and complete 101 within a year after their ALP semester, and that far fewer of the non-ALP students, which is the gray bar, were able to do that. And because ALP students were more likely to complete 101, it also should be no surprise that they were more able to enroll in and complete 102 within that same 1-year follow-up period. But so one question that people have when they look at this first set of results is, okay, well, the ALP students were more likely to enroll in 101, that's part of the program, and therefore it makes sense that more of them would be able to complete it, but how did they do in those courses? So the second set of results looks at pass rates within 101 and 102, and it compares those who came to 101 and 102 from ALP versus those who came to those college-level courses through the regular developmental sequence. And when you look at the pass rates within those courses, it looks like the ALP students actually outperform the students who came from regular developmental education within the 101 and 102 classes. When we actually do this in a regression and control for the various demographics, this difference doesn't turn out to be significant, but one thing that is clear is that the department doesn't have to worry about pass rates in 101 and 102 declining because of the accelerated program. They're at least the same and perhaps even a little bit better. So the report in ALP also discusses some other positive and significant differences, including higher term-to-term persistence, and the ALP students had about a 2-point bump in college-level credit accrual over the tracking period. So then I'm going to turn to Chabot. So in Chabot, their course numbering is totally different. So here, English 102 is actually a developmental course. That's the accelerated course. So the study compares those that took the accelerated 102 compared with those who took the alternative 2-course sequence, which is here called the traditional sequence. Although that may be a little bit of a misnomer because the 102 accelerated course has been around for about 15 years and at this point enrolls just as many students as the other sequence. So they're both quite normative. But we're going to talk, what's that? 3 times as many. So I'm talking here about accelerated versus traditional, but they're both traditional in a way. Okay, so here we're looking at whether students get to and through college-level English within a year after they take the target course. And we see strong differences in enrollment in college-level English. Those who took the accelerated developmental course are much more likely to get to English. So we've got the black bar versus the gray bar. Much more likely to enroll in college-level English in that time because they only have to first complete the 1 course instead of 2 courses before they get there. And then if we compare their performance within the course, if they enroll in college-level English, do they earn a C? Those that came from the accelerated sequence do a little bit better, and because we have a larger sample size here, this difference is significant. So they're doing significantly better within the course. And so when you take these 2 positive effects and you add them together, you get the number who are able to get to and through to complete college-level English with a C within a year after their first course, and there is a pretty strong gap there, which is significant. So these positive differences only slightly diminish when you extend the tracking period from 1 year to 3 years or even 5 years. And the differences remain significant when you're looking not just at the students with the higher scores who chose to take the accelerated class, but even students who scored below the median on both the reading and the writing placement exams. You still have a significant positive effect for those students. And we still even have a positive effect for those who scored so low on the placement exam that they were referred to ESL testing. Students, even in that category, who chose to take the accelerated course, still saw positive effects versus their peers who took the regular 2-course sequence. So the report also discusses positive differences in college-level credit accrual, long-term transfer and graduation. And for those outcomes, the acceleration estimates were still significant among students with the below median reading and writing test scores, but they weren't as strong. And that effect disappeared for the students who initially scored so low that they were referred to ESL testing. But these students, even for these students, there was no negative effect in terms of their ability to get to and through. So. Now for Fast Start. I know this is very quick, but here we're comparing students who took one of the combined math courses, either the lowest plus the middle course or the middle plus the upper course, to students who started in the parallel 2-course sequence. So for this, I'm going to show you just more on the timing of when the differences appear. We have some similar results, so I just sort of want you to see what happens over time. So first, we'll look at whether they got to and through the top level of developmental math. So first, on the left-hand panel, we had the students who started 3 levels below. The solid line is the fast start students who took the compressed course. And the dotted line are the students who started with the regular lowest level course and had to get through 3 courses. So those who took the compressed course were much more likely to move on to the final developmental course and get through it with a C or better in the next semester after fast start. And then the students in the traditional sequence, the dotted line, they first had to take another course before they could get there. So it took them a while to start to, for more of them to sort of move into and get through that upper developmental course. So there's sort of an immediate first semester boost for the fast start students. And that gap narrows a bit over the first couple of semesters, but after that it remains pretty consistent. So the traditional students, if they didn't get through upper level developmental math within the first couple of semesters, it was unlikely that it was going to happen for them. And on the right side, we look at students who were referred to the second level and who took the middle plus the top compressed course versus those who started with the regular middle level course. And about 65% of the accelerated students passed that top level, that compressed course their first semester with a C or better. And then the traditional students, they had to take at least a semester to get to that point. And a few more of them straggled in to complete the top level course over the next few semesters, but we still have this large gap that remains consistent over time. So I could also show you Gatekeeper Math, but I don't really have time. But you can see we have a similar effect, that there's a gap that narrows a bit over the first couple semesters, but after that remains fairly consistent. So in terms of other effects, with Fast Start, we didn't see significant effects in terms of persistence in school or the number of college level credits earned during the 3-year follow-up. That college level credits might be because the Gatekeeper Math course, even though the Fast Start students were more likely to get to and through it, not all the students took Gatekeeper Math that counted for college level credit. It counted for their terminal math course, but not necessarily for college level credit. So finally, let's look at a study that's not about a program per se, but it's just a naturally existing policy. So the City University of New York has 6 community colleges, about to have a 7th, that use the same placement exams and cutoffs into college level work, but each of them designs their own developmental programming, and it turns out that some of them have longer developmental sequences than others. So if you score poorly on the English exam with a writing score of 4 or lower, at some colleges you would be put into a 2-course sequence that's 8 to 12 credits, and at other colleges you would take 1 course that's only 6 or 7 credits. If you score very poorly in the math exam with a pre-algebra score that is less than 27, at some colleges you would take a 3-course sequence that's usually about 11 credits. At others you would take a 2-course sequence, which is typically about 8 credits. So we used propensity score matching to create matching samples of low-scoring students who went to either colleges with the longer sequences versus the college with the shorter sequences. And if we look first at English, those in the shorter sequences, which are the black bar, were more likely to enroll in college-level English within 3 years. They were slightly but significantly less likely to pass it. So those colleges did have slightly lower pass rates in their college-level English course, but that initial enrollment boost alone was enough to still help in getting significantly more students through college-level English within 3 years. And with math, we had a similar pattern. Those in the shorter sequences were more likely to enroll in college-level math, slightly less likely to pass it, although that difference wasn't significant here, and therefore slightly but significantly more likely to get through it within 3 years. So for both math and English, the shorter sequences also gave a very slight bump, about 1 or 2 percentage points in earning a degree within 3 to 5 years. But what's interesting about this study is that these are not intentional acceleration programs. There's no particular supports associated with them. They're not designed to move students through faster, per se. It was just what the college faculty at each college felt was what they needed to learn in the appropriate amount of time that they felt was needed for that content. So shorter sequences alone without any explicit desire to accelerate, might help students get through college-level math and English faster. And that's probably due in part to the fact that placement exams aren't necessarily accurate, and they can place a lot of students into lower courses than they need. So the shorter sequences may stop over-remediating students so much. And it's also probably because we're giving students fewer chances to drop out. But for a small proportion of students, if there's no thoughtfully designed acceleration program structures that are designed to support them through the shorter sequence, then the shorter sequence may not be enough to help prepare them to pass the college-level English and math courses at the same rates. So explicitly thinking about acceleration might help departments sort of think through and put place these structures that help support students through these shorter sequences so they can do just as well in college-level math and English. So the evidence from the last 3 studies suggests that compressed courses and shorter sequences and other forms of acceleration can help students even who are 2 and 3 levels below, help them get through faster. And we also saw that with ALP, when you have upper level students, that mainstreaming them with very targeted supports can help them get through. One thing that we don't know anything about is what if we took very low level students and tried to mainstream them with supports? We don't have any studies on that, so we don't know whether that would work or not. So if you're interested in the Baltimore County or the Chabot models, you should come hear Peter and Katie talk about them next in session 2E. If you're interested in Fast Start, you can hear Elaine talk about that next in section 2B. We don't have anything more on the CUNY sequences, but we do have several CUNY related talks tomorrow, so you should come check those out. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Angela Boatman. This is the first place I have traveled since receiving my graduate degree, and I will admit that I bought a plane ticket under the name Dr. Angela Boatman. I promise I will not do that again. I was told by my friend that's very socially irresponsible of me to do because I can't actually help anyone where a doctor would be required, but I'm going to talk this morning about some redesign efforts in Tennessee. Many of you may know about these efforts. They took place around the 2007-2008 academic years, and they were called the Tennessee Developmental Course Redesign Initiative. I'm going to talk just a bit about the institutions which redesigned their mathematics courses. So we know, as Tom mentioned earlier today, that there are still critical questions about whether or not remedial and developmental courses are helping students. But really, there are really big questions around which types of programs are most effective. And so I think this work is trying to get inside of the box of what are the kinds of programs that seem to be helping and or not helping students. So Tennessee has 19 public colleges that are under the Tennessee Board of Regents institutions. This does not include the 5 institutions under the University of Tennessee system. But of these 19, there are 13 two-year colleges, and they serve over 200,000 students. And among first-time students, the latest state data from Tennessee indicates that about 62% of all students in these colleges are taking at least one remedial course. So among first-time students. That number is higher in the two-year colleges than at the four-year, 77% in the two-year and 43% in the four-year colleges. Tennessee colleges offer remediation in 3 primary subjects, math, reading, and writing. And what they found in the late 1990s and early 2000s was that the colleges were all reporting high levels of course failure in these remedial and developmental courses. In many cases, over 50% of the students were failing these courses and or dropping out, particularly in developmental math. So in the mid-2000s, different institutions at the state applied for some FIPSI money to propose redesigning and reimagining the way that they offered their math courses. And so I'm going to talk to you today about the 3 institutions that redesigned their developmental math courses. There were 6 institutions that were funded in this effort, 4 in mathematics and 2 in reading. I'm not going to talk to you about Chattanooga State, which was the 4th institution in math, because they had some problems in the implementation of their redesign efforts, which they subsequently worked out and were able to offer their courses in new ways. But at the time that these other institutions were sort of getting up and running, they were having some implementation challenges. So of the 3 institutions, there were 3 very different redesign efforts. And again, this is around the 2007 and the fall of 2008. So Austin Peay State University, which is a 4-year college, proposed and implemented a mainstreaming approach, which we just heard from Shanna, is a relatively new and increasingly popular redesign effort. So what this was is that they eliminated their developmental math course and they placed students directly into college level. So essentially they did away with their developmental math course and then offered those students who would have otherwise been in the developmental math course a special outside workshop called a structured learning assistance workshop. So students were receiving additional supports but not enrolled directly in a developmental course. And that applied to their 2 upper level math courses, Fundamentals of Math or Elements of Statistics. Jackson State Community College proposed a redesign that was more focused around modules. So they took all 3 of their developmental math courses and they divided them up into 12 modules and were very specific and clear about what kind of material would be contained in those modules. And students were then asked to master only the material in the modules that they had not yet already mastered through a series of assessments and kind of a constant feedback loop. And then at Cleveland State Community College, they also implemented a similar modules type design, but also included this concept of acceleration, in which the course was divided into modules, the developmental math course, and students who completed the course before the end of the term could then go on to the next course in the sequence. So there was a real breakdown in sort of the traditional ways that a semester was defined in this sense. Students could move on to a new course before the actual semester might have ended. And there were, in 2008 and 9, a number of evaluations that were done of these redesign efforts, but those were primarily descriptive in nature or observational studies. They did find that these seemed to have positive effects on students getting through the courses. At Austin Peay, they said that the pass rate for their college level math course went from 17% to 76%, so it went way up in a very short amount of time. At Cleveland State, the number of students that were completing the course and moving on to the college level math increased 47%. So this was research that came out kind of right around when these programs rolled out. And much of it done by the National Center of Academic Transformation with Carol Twigg, who had been very instrumental in helping to redesign these courses. But however, what I was interested in looking at here was to try to find a comparison group that might be a bit more, that we might have a bit more confidence in, as opposed to just looking at that one course after the redesign and saying, here's what we know happened. There had been no real causal research on what were the effects of changing these courses for students. So I asked 2 research questions. The first is participation in these redesigned courses more effective than participation in traditional courses at similar institutions during the same time period? So here I'm using as a comparison group the other 4-year colleges in the state of Tennessee in that time, or the other 2-year colleges in the state of Tennessee in that time, who did not redesign the way that they offered their courses, or at least not at such a large scale as this one. And then secondly, is participation in redesigned remedial courses more effective than the traditional model at those same institutions pre and post redesign? So I'll talk a bit about the data that I received from Tennessee and how that allows me to do this. So the fine folks at the Tennessee Higher Education Commission and the Tennessee Board of Regents provided me with 4 cohorts of data for students that I was then able to follow through the spring of 2011. So I have students that began in the fall of 2006, 7, 8, and 9, with the redesigns taking place kind of right in the middle of this time period. And I have data on the students' demographics, as well as all of their course enrollment and their remedial placement information and whether or not they enrolled in their remedial courses, and then also credit accumulation. Because this only happened relatively recently, you'll hear that the results that I'm going to talk about are relatively short term, only about 2 years out, given that this did not happen many, many years ago. But future research I would continue to track students and see if this leads to differences in graduation rates potentially. The sample for this first pass of the research was looking at the more traditional students. So I was looking at first-time, full-time students under the age of 21. So these were students coming primarily right out of high school, which is a large number of students in Tennessee. And I also needed them to have a reported ACT math score, which I will talk about in just a minute, which it turns out about 98% of students in Tennessee have. Students that fit in this group. And that amounted to 80,000 students across all of the Tennessee colleges for those 4 years. But then for my second question, I was just looking at the institutions that redesigned their courses. And so that, looking across those 3 schools across 4 years, was about 9,000 students. So it's a large enough sample size to do some good analytic work with this question. So in Tennessee, over 80% of all students that are coming to college for the first time report an ACT score, a math score, an English score, a comprehensive score. And among those students who don't have an ACT score, they are predominantly non-traditional students. So the average age of those students is 28 years old. They are older. For those students to be assessed for remedial and developmental education, they take a compass test at the colleges where they are enrolling. For other students coming right out of high school during this time period, if they had an ACT math score, that was used. The score on their ACT math was used to place them into their developmental or remedial courses. So because of the cutoffs that were sharp in the state of Tennessee during this time, I'm able to use a regression discontinuity design to compare students just right on the margins of these cutoffs. And so what this looks like in math is that these 4 courses here is their developmental math sequence. So on one end is remedial arithmetic, the next highest level, Algebra 1, then Algebra 2, then college level. And these vertical bars here that divide the courses, these are cutoffs on the ACT math test. So here are the scores. And just intuitively, so that without showing any equations to you in the middle of June, to understand the sort of intuition of a regression discontinuity design is that I'm just comparing students who had like an 18 versus a 19 on this ACT math score. So if you had an 18, you were to be assigned to developmental algebra 2, a 19 placed you in college level. The intuition is that these are the same students, basically. They're just 1 point off on the math test. And so we can compare their outcomes, holding all things equal, because we could say that they're basically at the same level of academic preparation coming in. So, like I said, the outcomes that I looked at were relatively short-term, only because of the timing of the intervention. So just a handful that I looked at, and there is a longer NCPR working paper that describes much of this in much more technical detail if you're interested in that. But a few of the outcomes were, for example, first to second semester persistence, college level credits in the second semester, was the student still enrolled in the second year? How many credits had they completed after 2 years? So these are some examples of the outcomes. And for the first research question I mentioned, where I wanted to compare for example, Austin P, who redesigned their math course by mainstreaming students to the other 4-year colleges in the state, what I did was just include in the sample all 4-year colleges, and then include an interaction where I'm comparing Austin P to what happened and the other 4-year colleges. So what I want to look at then is this interaction effect of the other 4-year colleges and the institution that actually implemented the redesign. And it looked as if there weren't in some of the early effects, I didn't see very many statistically significant effects. But when it came to the college level of credits completed after 2 years, if I looked at the other 4-year institutions in the state, students had about 2 fewer credits, students who were enrolling in the more traditional developmental algebra course at the other colleges. Whereas for Austin P, it looked like this number actually went in the other direction. So students here had about 2.6 credits more than their peers in college level. And if you add these 2 numbers together, it looks like it's only about a half of a credit, but it is still a difference that we see with the four-year college that changed the way they offered remediation versus the other four-year institutions in the state that did not. And what this looks like graphically is that for all four-year colleges, to the left of this vertical kind of cutoff here is the developmental algebra 2, and then to the right is college level. And this gap is the difference then for students across the four-year colleges in the number of credits after 2 years. And you compare it to Austin P, which was the institution I was exploring here, we actually see that gap shifts directions. It's not huge, but it is a change in the direction, which would lend some evidence to the fact that maybe this was having a positive effect when compared to other four-year colleges. So when looking what I then wanted to do was look at the students within that institution only. So instead of comparing across the other schools in the state which did not redesign their courses, I wanted to just look within each institution. So in the case of Austin P, I looked before and after they changed these courses. And what I found here by looking at the assigned times post is that, for example, in first to second semester persistence, as we previously know, the colleges were reporting that their students were dropping out of both the courses and the institution when they were taking these courses. And we did see that in the pre-cohorts. However, in the post cohorts, it looks like this actually increased 7.6 percentage points for students after they had changed this policy. And then we saw a similar trend in the college level credits. Previously, the students by the end of the second year had developmental education students had 6 fewer college level credits, but after they redesigned and mainstreamed their courses, they actually had 2.5 more college level credits. At Cleveland State, which was the institution that used an acceleration model along with modules, and students in their second year, it looked like previously had about 4 fewer college level credits in the second year, but then had 6 for a difference of about 2 credits after they had redesigned their courses. In all of the outcomes that I used at Jackson State Community College, I didn't see any statistically significant effects. So just to summarize, and again, this was sort of a quick overview of what I was trying to look at in this study, but to summarize, it did look like students in 2 of these 3 institutions had more positive outcomes than their peers when compared to similar institutions that didn't redesign their courses, and when compared to their own institution prior to the redesign. So in both of those cases, this seemed to hold. It did appear that some of these effects were diminishing by the second year in some cases, so it will be interesting to look another year out or 2 years out and see what this might look like. However, it's important to remember that this results only apply to students at the margin. This cannot be extrapolated to students all the way down the distribution. So I was only looking at students up near that college level and developmental algebra 2. I'm not commenting on students that were in remedial arithmetic, for example, and that's an important piece to remember. The implications here, the biggest effects that I saw in Tennessee were actually from the 4-year institution that mainstreamed their developmental education, which meant that they eliminated it. However, I'm not recommending and suggesting this. There are cautions against endorsing this model fully, simply because we know that it might make a difference for students right around the margins, but it's not saying anything about further down the distribution where this might actually harm students to not offer them these types of courses. However, I do think this provides very strong endorsement that there are too many students that are being placed into developmental math at this level, and it provides some evidence that would support that the cutoff is not in the right place. So if the cutoff were possibly lower, maybe that would get closer to actually helping the students who need this the most. And I didn't see any extremely negative effects across any institutions. So one of the questions was if adopting these new learning technologies would have negative effects on students or on faculty and thus students. And it didn't appear that the adoption of these new technologies was causing any sort of harm. It might not have been helping in big dramatic ways, but it also certainly didn't appear to be harming student outcomes. So just to wrap up, in the future, I'm interested in looking at how these courses might work better or differently for different kinds of students, so older students, for example, or different students with different backgrounds or experiences. And also Tennessee this fall will be eliminating developmental education from their 4-year colleges. So I'm very interested in the potential impacts of prohibiting four-year colleges from offering developmental education. And then also just ways that I heard a lot from people in Tennessee about how it was so important to try to move this conversation beyond these courses as a burden on students and something they just have to get through, and try to move this conversation more to how can we see this as a developmental support? How can we identify what students need and just support them instead of burdening them with these courses? So, thank you.
So, does anybody have questions from this? Ed?
I have two. First of all, none of you mentioned any direct assessment of student learning. You talked about indirect assessment, such as retention rates, et cetera. Was there any, first question is, was there any direct assessment of student learning, like common departmental exams, to see if that made any difference? And the second question I have is towards Shanna. You stated that the results may be due to placement exam inaccuracy. Did you mean that, or did you mean placement process inaccuracy, or both?
Common departmental exams?
No, we did not use, we would have liked to have had an assessment of learning outcomes to look at the effect of learning communities on learning outcomes, both aligned with learning communities and not. But we didn't do that. That was beyond the scope, and there was at that time no assessment available, although there is one under development, as I understand it. So.
Okay.
Yeah, Tennessee also didn't at the time have a end of course exam or assessment. I thought about using the grade, GPA, just as a very rough measure of how a student was performing in the class. But I didn't have data that I could get an exact estimate on which course it came from. I just had overall.
The reason I ask is because there are some people, hard to believe, that say I can raise retention rates by lowering standards. That's why, to me, it's important to put both together. I'm not throwing away your data.
Yeah, that's extremely important. I think that the closest that we have in this set of studies to that is Chabot has a set of common learning objectives. And I think Katie can speak to those in the breakout session. But I think absolutely it would be really important for faculty to design common learning outcomes across sections of developmental and gatekeeper courses. And you're using an acceleration experiment. Let's make sure that we're still meeting the same learning outcomes. And even in the regular traditional courses, okay, we're not always meeting the learning outcomes there either. So what can we do? How can we try to collaborate with each other to figure out techniques that we can use to support students in both kinds of courses?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point.
Do you have comment on the other?
Yeah, and so on placement exam and accuracy, any exam, especially a short exam, as many placement exams are, is not going to be perfectly predictive or accurate because, a student sits down and takes a 20-minute exam. It gives you a sense of, what their capabilities are, but not a complete and total sense. So there's always going to be some inaccuracy, and it's a question of whether that inaccuracy is going to be more in the direction of saying, okay, we're concerned about placing students into courses that might be too high for them, so we want to set the cutoff score as high as possible, or we're concerned about placing students into courses that they don't necessarily need, so we don't want the placement test score to be too high, we're going to set it a little lower. That's what a lot of the cutoff score...
So there's error variance in the test.
There's always going to be error.
And so maybe cut ranges instead of cut scores, multiple variables, training of counsels and advisors, that kind of thing. So it's the process that you were talking about, not the test.
Right. Since
Thank
the
you.
test itself is not infallible, yeah, there should be a better process
what
around
test?
it.
We'll have more chance this afternoon to talk about the assessment question. So, any other questions for these folks? Yes.
Yes.
Could you identify yourself?
Yes, I'm Gillies Malnrick, and I co-direct the Washington Center for Improving the Quality of Undergraduate Education with Emily Lardner, and we're the National Resource Center for Learning Communities in the country. And I have many questions, but they all focus on the conclusions of this report, in particular the notion that this report of 6 institutions represents learning communities typically offered at community colleges in this country. One of the backstories that needs to be drawn attention to is that some of the institutions involved in this study didn't meet the 4 essential components outlined in the first section of this slide. In fact, they met only one, which was a cohort, and it was a broken cohort. And so all along, our cautioning about looking at these results has been to say, if we are going to look at learning communities and their impact on students, and particularly the quality of students' learning, because that's what we're trying to improve when we're talking about acceleration. We're trying to develop their academic abilities. Let's look at a standard range of learning communities as they're practiced in this country. We'll have more to say about this, but that, I think those words typically offered, you need to develop that claim further than you have. You need to let us know how you come to make such a wide sweeping conclusion, if you like.
Yeah, if I'd had, I wish I'd had more than 12 minutes. I would have gone into the process that we use to find community colleges to participate in the Learning Communities demonstration, which was very intensive and lasted more than a year. We scoured the country for community colleges that were running learning communities that did represent the continuum of learning communities that we knew were out there, ranging from basic to more advanced. And 2 of the 6 community colleges, Kingsborough and Merced, I would say came very close in terms of the model that they were intending to implement to learning communities that had all 4 components very much in the model. But I think that we looked hard and long for colleges that ran strong, scalable learning community programs where all 4 components were firmly in place and where all of the learning communities that were being operated at the time would have met the highest standard. And to be honest, it was hard to find. It was hard to find colleges that ran more than 2 or 3 learning communities. It was hard to find colleges that ran learning communities that were consistently implemented with extremely high fidelity. We did our best, and I think we came close with a couple of the colleges. So it was a very intensive process of recruitment, and we were all over this country. So I think that was the story that I didn't get to tell. The story is told in our reports. And then the second point is the point I did make in the presentation, I think, which is that in every college we did find learning communities that would meet that high standard, where curriculum integration was very tight, where they were meeting constantly, collaborating constantly, and offering interdisciplinary curriculum that was well connected. But then there were other learning communities where this was not the case. And that particular picture was true in all 6 of the colleges. So the story about more variation within college than across colleges, I think, is one of our main takeaways from this study. And we wrote a report called Scaling Up Learning Communities. And I think most of you who work in colleges maybe have a couple learning communities, maybe have tried to scale them up. It's hard. It's really hard work. So it's a complex story, and I would love to come to the session on learning communities that my colleague Evan Weissman is going to be facilitating, but I'll be facilitating another session instead, and get into this in more detail. But I wouldn't agree that we studied learning communities that were all just about cohorting and that cohorting was broken. That just doesn't fully characterize the learning communities that we ended up studying. 172 of them in 6 colleges.
All right, join me in thanking this 3 excellent presentations. So we have an official break now, so I won't be hounding you to come back, although it is 15 minutes, and if you'd like, we'd like to get the workshops going as soon as possible. So please, in about 15 minutes, head down to them. If you need help, we have people who can help you find them. So thank you.
I saw it and was like, I'm the last one.
I'm
sorry I went a little over.
we were late. I mean, we got late with the initial speeches. Yeah.
It was fine.
It's good to have some pressure on not going
Yes.
forever. I wish I could be able to do that.
Martha